Out of respect for your time, I will go ahead and get started. I am Jeremy Williams, Dr. Williams. I have kind of multiple roles here at the college. Not only am I a history instructor in this case, but I'm also director of advising for the college. So kind of a little bit about me. I have a bachelor's degree as far as education from JSU in economics. I went on and got a master's degree and a doctorate from a seminary. I don't hold that against me. And then I got my extra 12 hours back at JSU in history because I already had 6. So I have 18 hours of graduate level history, and I enjoy history. And I'm enjoying the opportunity to be able to teach you tonight and the rest of this semester. So where do we begin? We're going to begin by looking at the shell. Maybe you already have gone into this shell and you know how to get here, right? Everybody know how to get to Canvas? Okay. So we're going in and I want to tell you kind of how I have laid everything out. The first thing you need to do is you need to go in and you need to read simple syllabus, take this syllabus quiz for attendance verification. I'm going to use these as bonus points. If you get one wrong, I'm not going to hold it against you. I just need a verification of your attendance for aid purposes. So you must be in the class. Now, I've got some of you on roll already. I didn't ask your names, but if y'all want to come to me afterwards, let me know you're here. I can also verify your attendance that way. But ultimately, to do an attendance verification. I have already gone and opened Module 1. There is a lecture there. I will post this also there for your review. Every week, you're going to have a discussion and a quiz. There will be a midterm and a final. On the midterm, it's only going to be what you see from Module 1 to Module 8. On the final, it's only going to be from what you see in the midterm to the final. Okay, so when you get to your final, it's not going to be the entire semester you're having to deal with. So I understand that, and out of respect to you, I do the same that has been done for me. It's not the entire semester. Also, there will be opportunities for bonus points. I am developing a bonus point assignment when we get to the American Revolution, where it's going to be, you're going to listen to actually some podcasts of British historians speaking about the American Revolution from a British perspective. Because what we get often is the American perspective of the American Revolution, not the British perspective, and the British perspective on the people who were involved in the American Revolution. So that's going to be something that comes up. So that's kind of a little bit of the layout of the class. And I'm really not a person that is a surprise person, okay? I want to lay it out for you, big, plain, and straight, so you'll know exactly where you are throughout the semester. And if there's ever a question, just send me a Canvas message, send me an email. Email is about the easiest way to get a hold of me. And also, you can call my office. My office is in Enzer Hall, the next building over, in the Advising and Retention Center. And if you have any question, just let me know. So this is the syllabus. And you'll go through here and look for the information that you need for the syllabus quiz. There's my lovely photo and my contact information. Russ Williams is the division chair. Dr. Griffey is the Dean of Academics. And you'll see all of the policies that go along. You'll also see the text. And we're using this book. It's the Give Me Liberty text. Now, I am asking you to read this text. And so the majority of your quiz questions are going to come from reading the book. And honestly, if you see those quiz questions, if you're familiar with American history or studying the general time frame of each one, the quiz questions aren't, I don't make them extremely hard, okay? I'm not trying to, again, trick you, but this is the volume that we're going to use for this class, and it will require reading. So I expect to read the textbook. And you'll see how I've got everything laid out. Each module, you'll watch the lecture or come to the lecture. You will read the chapter and discussion and quiz, midterm, final, no surprises, okay? I don't like surprises myself, not gonna surprise you. As you keep going through there, you see final exam, December 10th. Now here's my caveat about the final exam. I'm gonna leave everything open. Grace upon grace upon grace. Everything will be open until the very end. But I will not open after December 10th at midnight. After that, everything's closed. And so please don't say, oh, Dr. Williams, please help. No. There's the day, there's the time, you know, be prepared, okay? And normal grading, nothing outlandish, normal policies, know when's the last day to withdraw. I deal a lot with that since I'm in the advising area. So, and know all the policies. I'm not going to ask you quiz questions deep in the policy, okay? But I will ask just basic stuff as far as the syllabus quiz is concerned. Okay. Any questions y'all have to this point regarding, yes?
Is that book going to be provided, or do we have to purchase it ourselves?
You would purchase it through the bookstore.
Okay. I went there this morning.
Okay.
It's online.
It's online. Okay. So they can provide it for you online. Okay. And like I said, I'm leaving everything open. If it takes you a week to get this book, it's okay. All right? I will work with you. So with that being said, we kind of look at where we are as far as Module 1. And Module 1 has to deal with pre-Columbian history. So if I say our pre-Columbus history, what am I saying? Before Columbus discovered America, absolutely. So what we're going to look at is that very thing before Columbus and the Atlantic world. So understand that there were people here before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. All right. There were people already all over North and South America. Where did they come from? The general consensus as to where they came from was from Asia. So they came across the Bering Strait. Beringia is the land bridge they came across. And they came from north to south, and we'll talk about that. But what are we going to learn in this lecture this evening? Well, we're going to learn about the first Americans. I want to talk to you about who they were, where they came from, their different cultures, because Native Americans aren't monolithic in that they are all the same. You know, Columbus names them Indians because he thinks they are in India. They are in that part of the world. But he wasn't in that part of the world, but the moniker stuck because most of the history of the world is taught through European American eyes. And so they use that terminology, and everyone else just carried on with it even to this day. A lot of history is taught, most of history is taught through that perspective. And so that's what's shaping the history that we have. But there were Native American cultures that were different from each other. They weren't all just the same. We're going to talk about the Mayas, the Aztecs, and the Incas, and the great civilizations that they were and how they were established and what they ultimately did and what was the ultimate end of them. The exploration of the Europeans, primarily early on, it was the Spanish that came over, and they were exploring all of South America, Mesoamerica, Middle America, and North America, and we'll talk about the different explorations that went on there. The Columbian Exchange is an idea, and we'll talk about it a little bit further and flesh it out. But when they began, they, the Europeans, came over to explore this area of America. They brought goods with them. Well, not only did they bring goods with them, but they also brought some not so goods, and that is diseases. And we'll talk about the impact of epidemic disease upon the Native American population. And then there was some exchange that the Native Americans had for the Spanish and the other explorers as well. The Spanish Empire and the establishment of it, this was the early empire that began to go all over this area of North and South America and really conquer. So that there's different civilizations that began to explore this area. There's the Spanish, then the French, the Portuguese, and also ultimately the English, but each exploration was a little bit different, and we'll look at that. Then the Atlantic slave trade that also comes up. We'll talk about something called the encomienda system, and that is how it was the enslavement of the native people, and then how that played into what became almost, without saying it, a necessity of the slave trade for labor because of the failure of the encomienda system, and I'll explain that. And then the different ideas of liberty that all of these groups have, whether it be the Native Americans, the enslaved people, or the Europeans themselves. So this is kind of an overview. So America before Columbus. You have to get in your mind that this area was populated, and populated extensively. It's not as if they were coming into an area in which there was absolutely nothing. There was millions of people in America at this time, and they were native peoples. Hundreds of different languages that are spoken. They have different dialects, and so they may share a common language, but even in that there are different dialects. Like when we are here and we are speaking English, well, there may be a term that someone from North Alabama says one term for one thing, and then someone says something differently from South Alabama, like what is a water hose or a hose pipe. Yeah. There's different dialects, there's different uses of language. Understand they also had complex governmental systems that were overarching over their tribes. There were women involved in governing in these tribes. And then the extensive trade network that's going on. You have crops. Yes?
Is this slideshow going to be like presented on our Canvas?
It's on your canvas.
Okay, so we don't need to write this down?
You have to write everything down now, unless you just want to remember it.
Okay.
It's on the canvas.
Okay.
And so there are extensive trade networks connecting regions. And then you have Europeans who arrive on the scene, and they're transforming an ancient world rather than beginning its history. So there's already a world that exists in North America, and it's highly inhabited by millions of Native Americans. But when we read most history textbooks, they begin with Columbus. Why did they begin with Columbus? They begin with Columbus because really of the written language. Columbus himself, you have an idea?
I was just going to say, they probably had written stuff, but not like the Europeans, right?
They had,
History begins, not because history didn't already happen, it's just when we began to document everything.
absolutely. So when Columbus comes over, he writes extensively in his journals. He is prolific in what he writes. I'll read you some things that Columbus says, particularly when he comes into the area of Hispaniola, which is in the Caribbean. Here's an excerpt from his journal. On the 33rd day after leaving Cadiz, I came into the Indian Sea, because he thinks he's in India, where I discovered many islands inhabited with numerous people. So he's telling what he is finding. I took possession of all of them for my most favored king. He's on commission from Ferdinand and Isabella out of Spain. He's an Italian. And then he makes public proclamation of the king and unfurls his standard, no one making resistance. So he's talking about how they are reacting to him and those with him as he comes in. A little further on, he mentions Hispania, which is the island of Hispaniola. And I will tell you, and we'll get to this, but I'll go ahead and say it now. When they come into the island of Hispaniola, there are 300,000 native peoples already there. Now, this is not a huge island. Now, this is modern-day Dominican Republic and Haiti. It's not a huge island. 50 years later, after the Spanish have come in, there are 500 people left, 500 natives left. It's not that they are destroyed by sword and they are taken out by sword. It's epidemic disease that kills a lot of them. And it's mainly one, and that's smallpox. They have no immunity to smallpox because this is the first time they are even in connection with any Europeans at all. And they're not immune to these diseases. Yeah, us sitting on the other side of COVID, we understand this a little bit more now, right? What epidemic disease can do. So the first Americans, where did they come? They came, the idea is, they came from Asia, over the Bering Strait, across a place called Beringia, which connected Siberia to Alaska. So civilization is coming over and down. Well, that's what is taught most, and it's taught in your history book. There are some who are questioning this even now because there is evidence that it could be that the civilizations of South America went north. One of the things they are looking at is the use of corn, where corn came from and how it got used later. So corn is coming from South America, moving north through North America. So it's either that they came down this Bering Strait and continued on, or they came up from Peru as they've learned how to build boats and they've migrated and built trade routes north. For the purpose of this class and the purpose of the textbook, we are going along with the consensus idea that they are coming down in this fashion. Mainly they are hunter-gatherers at this point, meaning they don't have established settlements. They are going around looking for what may be there. whether it's berries or they are actually taking wild game down. And they'll do that even more later on. But they're hunter-gatherers, they're moving, they're migrating over a period of centuries. And the idea here is that humans reached the Americas at least 15,000 years ago. Why 15,000 years? There are several sites and several things that if you study Native American culture and Native American history that you'll get into. The first really thing is the idea called the Clovis people. And the Clovis people settled around New Mexico and the Southwest. They are thought to be the oldest existing peoples in America. But there are ways that they have looked at different archaeological locations. They're using a process called luminescence, where they take a piece of say coal or charred wood, and they're putting it through a process and say, when was the last time this piece saw light? And so they're going back and they're saying, well, 15,000 years ago, a place in Texas called Buttermilk Creek, this is where we find a piece of bioluminescence that we can use in order to date it back to this point. Now, that idea of humans reaching this area 15,000 years ago, that is a consensus idea. If you have a different worldview that causes you to think, well, human beings didn't even exist at this point in history, well, this might confront you a little bit, but that's okay. But what is historically thought and historically taught is around 15,000 years ago, because we have archaeological evidence telling us that this is when the earliest Americans were settled. And so migration is going gradually from north to south, or south to north. We're trying to figure it out. And so there are questions even today. So just like science, it's not always settled until we find something that's going to tell us, other than what we normally know of, here's what we're going with. And as they move through, there's adaptations that are happening as they cross the Americas. Some are going into the forest, some are going into the plains, deserts, mountains, and coastlines. They migrate to different places. And these different places cause cultural differences from one tribe to the next, or one group to the next. Because if you're in a forest, you're going to be looking and foraging for what's found there. So it could be that they're foraging for mushrooms. It could be that they are going in the forest and hunting deer and elk, and all these things are abundantly there. Well, deer and elk aren't found in deserts. So they have to develop technologies, like the Pueblo people in the Southwest, around New Mexico and Colorado. They're focused on irrigation. Yes, they have corn, but they have to irrigate in order to make this work. Up in the mountains, it's going to be cold, so they're going to have to adapt to the cold. Yes, they will kill elk. They will wear the skin of the elk. They will do what they need to do to survive. They're along coastlines, people who stopped on this migration period, like those in the Pacific Northwest. Their cultures are going to be built along the coastlines, and they're going to be fishing, and salmon becomes an abundant resource for them, and it's highly regarded. So they're influenced by food, housing, religion, government, clothing, all these things based on the abundance of whatever resource and region there are. So if I asked you the question, if you were going to establish a civilization, what do you need? You need all these things. And really it comes down to a term, and that is resources. They need resources. And whatever resources are abundant to them, they're going to use. You have a different diversity amongst the Native American tribes. You'll have the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw. These are part of those civilized tribes that we know of so well because these are found primarily in the southeastern United States. Now, some people, even to this day, can trace their heritage back to one of these tribes. You have the Pueblo people, the Navajo, the Sioux, the Apache, those in the southwest like the Pueblo, the Sioux and the Apache along the Great Plains, particularly in the north of the Great Plains. The Comanche are another one. They'll come up later. They come up later particularly with the use of horses that the Spanish leave. There was a place in Taos, New Mexico, and Santa Fe where something took place called the Pueblo Revolt or Pueblo Riot. And that's when the Pueblo rose up against the Spanish. And in that instance, and you can read about it in the text, in that instance, they took horses that were left from the Spanish, and they took, I think it was 200 or more horses. Horses had died out in North America. There's archaeological evidence that they existed previously, but they went extinct. Yeah. See, I remember growing up being told that there were no horses. And then I learned something new as I studied for this. But they had gone extinct. Now the Spanish bring them with them, and particularly when the Pueblo Revolt happens, they take them, they breed them, and then they're great in use along the Great Plains because they can cover great distances and they can hunt herds of buffalo and move along with the buffalo herd and use that as a source of sustenance for themselves. Each one has different languages, different customs, different government, different economies. These are somewhat sophisticated organizations that they put together. You have regional cultures. You have the eastern woodlands, probably a little bit more what we're familiar with, and they're going to establish civilizations, and they're going to establish them on farming. The Native Americans will actually take a plot of land and clear it out. They're going to remove trees. They're going to have controlled burns. They're going to set up large areas of farming with the crops they have. There are three primary crops that are known as the Three Sisters. It's squash, beans, and corn. And they find that these grow well together. Think about this, and they kind of cross-pollinate each other. And they use the corn as the stalk for the beans to grow up. And so these crops work well together. They find out this over a period of time, and the exchange that happens between different civilizations. And then in the eastern woodlands, particularly here, you have fertile soil and it rains and there's opportunity to establish civilizations. Now, anybody ever been to Moundville? So Moundville is a huge archaeological site south of Tuscaloosa. There are Indian mounds that were built there. They are part of the Mississippian culture. And this is where the term or the state Mississippi gets its name. It's founded after a culture of people, the Native Americans, that had established a civilization, a culture. The main place for the Mississippians was a place across from St. Louis, Missouri, and it was called Cahokia. Cahokia was at one point, I think it was like 1300s, as big as Rome and Paris. There were, and at Cahokia, there were 15 to 20,000 people. Surrounding the area, there were 30 to 50,000 people. So these are huge civilizations, and there's evidence that they are going to places like Moundville. They're going to a place actually up the Coosa River from here called the Etowah Indian Mounds. So they're trading and intermingling with one another. And when Cahokia goes down, a lot of these people move to the other established villages that are already there. So in the eastern woodlands, you see these permanent establishments. in the Great Plains are hunting buffalo. They're going along the plains in the horses that they have gotten from the Spanish, and they are going after the biggest game there is. No longer do they hunt the woolly mammoth. By the way, there are archaeological evidence of mammoth sites that they see that the ancient Americans took down. But the mammoth is gone at this point. There's buffalo hunting, and they are following these herds of buffalo, taking only what they need. They're not slaughtering the buffalo. The slaughter of the buffalo comes on later in the 1800s with rifles and trains. You know, that actually were driving trains along the Great Plains, and there would be a herd of buffalo, and there were people shooting from the trains, killing the buffalo. And there you can see pictures of just skulls of buffalo and buffalo bones just mountains high because of this. The native peoples weren't doing this. They were taking what they needed. Southwest, you have irrigations that are going on in these adobe communities, these large structures being built. In one of the sites, they even have interchambers, like a lower basement that they have built because they understand or think that it is from the cradle of the earth in which we have come. And so they have little rooms in the basements of these places to kind of remember those things. It's part of their community and religion. Pacific Northwest, it's cedar lodges and abundant fishing. So they use the resources they have, and their cultures encompass these resources. And then you get into the Mayan civilization and these other large civilizations we find in Mesoamerica and South America. So the idea that these people are just primitive gets knocked down when you look at places like the Mayan civilization. So they have mathematics, astronomy, writing, architecture. They build these large temple mounds. And so this is not primitive, this is more sophisticated. So how do we explain a sophisticated technology that has actually come about over a process of thousands of years? And then, most of you are pretty young. There was a lot of hubbub about the Mayan calendar, 2012. Yeah. And it was ending, and they thought, well, this is the end of the world because the Mayan calendar has actually run out. You know, but what they have is, you see a witness to a marvelous civilization being built by what the Europeans will call a primitive people. Well, this is not too primitive. This is, yes, not what they have as far as the sophistication of Europe, but this is highly intelligent. It shows a high level of intelligence amongst these people. Now, there was another group that, well, a high level of intelligence was there, but they used it for a different purpose, and that was the Aztecs. Where the Mayans were, we'll say the Mayans were the smart group, okay? The Aztecs, they were the brutal group. The Aztecs were conquerors. And they were kind of the guns for hire at the beginning. Other people, other villages and cultures would get the Aztecs to come in and get rid of the people that they wanted to get rid of. And eventually the Aztecs gained so much power that they become the boss. And what took place in what is modern day Mexico City. So modern day Mexico City, anybody ever been to Mexico City? I've never been to Mexico City myself, okay? Mexico City is about 6,000 feet above sea level. It's up on mountains. There was a lake in the middle of that area of Mexico City. And on that lake, outside of that lake, the Aztecs are together and they're looking for a place to put their capital. And they bring the tribal elders together and they set on an intention, and the intention is this, that where they see a hawk resting on a branch with a snake in its mouth, there will we build our capital. They found one. They found it on an island in the middle of this lake. And so they began to build Tectilon in the middle of this lake on an island. And they dig out and build up this island, and this is the beginning of what is modern day Mexico City. And so the Aztecs are there fully established when the Spanish arrive. Now understand, the Aztecs are doing human sacrifice. The Spanish see that they're doing human sacrifices. By the way, even at Cahokia, there's early evidence that they are sacrificing humans. It takes a different term later on. They stop doing it for some reason. We don't know exactly why. But the Aztecs are. They'll cut the heart out of someone while they're still alive. They were brutal. They had a military power, and they had religious ceremonies that did involve human sacrifice. So while we're looking at these cultures and they say, well, they're primitive, and then also they're very sophisticated in their ability to use mathematics and astronomy and tell what's going on in the world and the natural world, they're also very brutal even to one another. There's war and tribal war going on because at the end of the day, these are human beings looking for power, control, and territory. So when the Spanish come over, we have the idea of, well, these are just simple native people. No, they're not simple native people. They are capable of destruction. So you have to keep that in mind as you're thinking about these things. The capital ends up being a large city, even exceeding some of the populations of large cities in Europe. Then down in South America, you have the Incas. And the Incas, they're in a high elevation. Of course, you have Machu Picchu, it's pictured here. And they are going on and they are building roads, bridges, terrace farming. This is because when you're in the high elevations, you need plenty of area to be able to plant the corn. So you build up with using terraces, you build up rock, put soil into the rock and make flat places so that you can farm and engineer, and they have a centralized government because this becomes their capital. These civilizations are building capitals just like the Europeans. You have Paris, you have Cahokia. You have Machu Picchu, you have Rome. And so they're as sophisticated, as knowledgeable as the Europeans. But what about their ideas of freedom? And how do they relate to a modern idea of freedom? Okay. So Native Americans, these natives, they emphasize family, community, shared responsibility, and harmony with nature. And then the question, how does that differ from a modern idea of freedom? What do you think a modern idea of freedom is? What do other people say freedom is?
Never free.
What?
Never free.
Never free? Freedom is never free. Okay.
Because of our soldiers.
Right.
And our wars.
You continue to have to pay the price for freedom. Freedom as individuality?
It just depends on the person. I think we view freedom a lot of times as not belonging to someone, but like you said, it's just freedom from what?
Yeah. Right. Freedom from what? So, modern idea of freedom, if the modern idea is about autonomy, which means we don't need other people, could you say that there are some that hold the idea of autonomy as absolute freedom? If autonomy is the modern day, how does that shape with this? Well, it would be in contrast, right? Because the idea of freedom to the native is family. It's community. It's togetherness, shared responsibility, harmony with nature, and how that differs from how many view the world today and how many view the concept of freedom. So now we come to why was the reason for the exploration to begin? Well, it's economic. So there's reasons for moving forward. There's gold, silver, spices to be had. Now they're already from Europe going into the East. And so the part of this exploration is they want to find a quicker way to get here, rather than going over land. So Marco Polo has already gone over this area quite extensively, right? He's already traded with those in Asia. He's brought back gold, silver, spices. There is political competition that's going on amongst the major nations in Europe, whether it be Spain, Portugal, France, England later. But England, of course, establishes the greatest colonies and establishes colonial rule here on the east coast of the United States. And then there is the desire for the spread of Christianity, primarily at this time Catholic Christianity, because Spain and France and Portugal, Spain particularly, is a Catholic nation. Christopher Columbus, Marco Polo was too, but Christopher Columbus is Catholic. He's Italian Catholic, working with the Spanish. So understand that's also a reason that they would go and explore. So what about the man himself, Christopher Columbus? 1492, he begins his voyage to what he thinks is Asia. Well, it's not. But he dies thinking it is. He makes 4 or 5 trips to what is the Americas, always believing he made it to Asia. The problem is not, we have this, what's going on nowadays, the flat earthers, okay? All right, so the world is round. It's okay. But even back then, there were some who did believe the earth was flat. Christopher Columbus and those who explored did not think the earth was flat. They knew it was round. They knew we were on a globe. What they didn't know is how big the earth was. So they were thinking, if I just go this way, if I go west, I'm going to hit Asia. Well, they didn't know there was a large 2-continent area that was separating Europe from Asia. So they ended up in the Americas. So he always believed he reached Asia, but it wasn't until Amerigo Vespucci and his belief that, yes, this was not Asia that he reached, this is a different place. And it ultimately becomes named after Amerigo Vespucci and not Christopher Columbus. But he's sponsored by Spain, yet he's Italian. And he's going on this great journey. He goes not only to find out and establish a trade connection, but he goes to establish also his faith. With them are missionaries. And they are going actively to convert those who they meet, and that will be a big part of what goes on in the conquest, because it's not only a conquest for goods, it becomes a conquest for the spread of Christianity globally. And so that's always there in the picture. And that will come up many times throughout our discussion. But something happens, and it becomes called the Columbian Exchange. And here's a little diagram. Basically what takes place here is there's an exchange of goods between those coming from Europe and those who are already here established. This is not an exhaustive list, but it kind of gives you an understanding of what is brought by each group, or what's taken from one. Europe brings to America horses, wheat, sugar, smallpox. Smallpox being the most devastating of all. Now, horses, of course, I said there's ancient horses, they're gone. Now, there are horses that the Spanish bring in order to explore on horseback and go out and reach areas faster because they're used to traveling by horseback where they are. Wheat, sugar, there are sugar plantations that are established primarily in the Caribbean. Because the process of sugar takes a long time, sometimes 2 years to mature, and you need it always to be above the freezing mark, and so they have to keep it within the Caribbean and establish sugar plantations, and this is where the encomienda system comes in. This is where the Atlantic slave trade will come in later on, because they need someone to work the crops. They need someone to work in this system, and they go first to those who are already there, but it will be devastating. Smallpox, I mentioned the island of Hispaniola, 300,000 when Columbus arrives, 500 left 50 years later. It wasn't just that the Spanish went in and slaughtered the people. What killed off more Native Americans than anything else was epidemic disease. It devastates populations. Later on, when Hernando de Soto, who came around the southeast, any of you remember, like down in Childersburg, there was a place called De Soto Caverns? Okay, now it's Mystic Cavern. Oh, we changed the name, okay?
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, we did change the name. Somebody changed the name. Anyway, the idea was this is one of the places where De Soto came, because he did come through here. So he came through this area, he met with different Native American tribes along the way, bringing smallpox. De Soto had pigs that he brought. And so there were pigs introduced into the Americas for the first time through De Soto. And then the Americans gave to the Europeans corn, potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate, tobacco, syphilis, you know.
Why are you just casually throwing?
Well, they gave the Native Americans a disease, and the Native Americans gave them back another disease. Although the syphilis onto the Europeans was not as devastating as the smallpox on the Native Americans. But you can read. I mean, we're not in high school anymore. Okay, we're in real. All right, tobacco will become a huge cash crop. Corn, not so much. Rice later on. They introduce, there's 3 main crops and then one that comes later. 3 main crops: sugar with the sugar cane, tobacco. Tobacco becomes the main cash crop for the middle colonies, Virginia. When they establish Jamestown, they figure out that they can sell tobacco. Tobacco is planted everywhere. South Carolina, it's going to be rice. Outside of Charleston, there are large plantations, and all it was rice fields, because that was the big cash crop for South Carolina. It had to do regionally where these crops can grow, and they used them to their advantage. I mentioned epidemic disease. There's no immunity for the natives. None whatsoever. Smallpox spreads, and it spreads rapidly. I mentioned you have the spread of Christianity, you have missionaries. There's an account of one missionary who is trying to minister to these natives as they are dying. Okay? And what this missionary is doing is he has a bucket of water. He has a cloth in the bucket, and he's wiping each one of the natives as they are going through this epidemic disease. He doesn't realize what he's doing. What is he doing? He's spreading it. They keep dying. He's spreading it. He doesn't realize. Because in civilization, we don't realize this. It's not until the 1800s we realize, okay, you can't go from a dying corpse to a pregnant mother without killing a child. Epidemic disease is what does the thing. Entire communities disappear. I mentioned Hispaniola. Coquia, we don't know what has taken place at these places. That civilization goes from, in the 1100s, being as big as Paris, to in the 1300s, not existing. And that's even before the disease comes in. But disease wipes out myriads of people. And the population reaches, the loss of population reaches catastrophic levels just from epidemic disease. So it's not as if the Spanish come in with their swords and knock everybody down. It's really, they did that, yes. And they did some very devastating things, but it was epidemic disease. So they build their empire, the Spanish. They come in first. And you see from this map, you have De Soto going through the southeastern United States. He has already gone with Pizarro to the Incas, and they have wiped out the Incas at this point. De Soto was with Pizarro, and then after he was done there, in 1532, later on in 1539, De Soto goes to the southeastern United States. Cortez will go to the Aztecs, and we'll look at those and I'll talk a little about what happens there. So, they're establishing colonies along the way. In the Caribbean, this is where they're going to have plantations, primarily, like I said, sugar cane, the process of sugar, because there's a desire for it. The desire for it comes from Europe. It's economic. They want it. And so here they are to supply it. Mexico, Central America, South America, all along the way, they are establishing their colonies and putting up a devastating conquest with the conquistadores, these men for hire. It's just men. Like you'll notice of the Spanish, there's not women with them. Later on, when the English establish their colonies, there will be an incentive to establish colonies where entire families are there. These are men going out to conquer. And Cortez and Pizarro. Well, Pizarro goes down to South America, essentially wipes out the Incas. But all along the way, they're doing some things. And particularly, I'll mention Cortez with the Aztecs and native allies. The Aztecs have already sacrificed their neighbors. And so you can imagine, we had these Spanish come along. They are wanting to go up against the Aztecs. So the Spanish make connection with the allies that want to get rid of the Aztecs themselves, and they use them to help them conquer the Aztecs. So it's not as if it's just the Spanish on the Aztecs. No, it's the Spanish and native allies against the Aztecs. This happens. We don't often hear about it, but this is the reality of the situation, what took place there. It's other tribes also warring against other tribes and aligning themselves to overthrow their enemies. So that happens with Cortez. And they come in, and they have horses, they have steel weapons against those who have no defense. Firearms, and of course, I said disease. The encomienda system is one that's often kind of overlooked. This is what the Spanish wanted to do originally, or tried to establish early, and that was taking the native population and enslaving them to an extent and getting them to work on these established plantations. But the problem is disease kills them. And so you're enslaving people, and all the while you're around the people and they're dying. And so really the encomienda system fails for two reasons. Understand that everybody that came over, as far as the empires are concerned, Spain, France, later England, I won't say they're not all bad people, okay? There are those amongst them, like the missionaries that come with them, that see this going on and they say, this is absolutely terrible. They should not be treating these people in this way. Even one, Bartholomew de Casas, who was a missionary, is speaking about the natives, and here's what he says. He said, the natives are capable of morality or goodness. They are very adept to receive the principles of the Catholic religion, nor are they adverse to civility or good manners. I have myself heard the Spaniards themselves, who are not assume the confidence to deny the good nature of them, declare that there was nothing wanting in them for the accusation of eternal grace, but soul knowledge and understanding of deity. So what is he saying? He's saying they have an understanding of a greater good. All they need is our God. So they see what's going on here. And at one point, de Casas writes to the King of Spain saying, what is going on here is not good. These people are not going to become part of our faith if they are continually treated in this way. He was right. So not all the people who come over with the Spaniards are there to conquer. Some are there to minister. Some are there to help. So even when we look at those who came over, they're not all trying to just use these people for economic gain, but a lot of them are. Forced labor, abuse, exploitation is the reality of the encomienda system. And because really of the failure of the encomienda system, because these people are dying, now there's something else going on that unfortunately economically might relieve their situation. And that begins the Atlantic slave trade. Understand, you already have Portugal that has come down to the Gold Coast and has established a decade ahead of the trip of Columbus across. They have established connection with the tribes off of West Africa. Muslim traders have come across the Sahara Desert. They have already had connection with Europeans. This is important. Say this is important. This is a reason that slaves from Africa become so valuable. They become so valuable because they've already gone through epidemic disease. If they are still alive, and who survives the most? The young. If they can come through and manage to live through a bout of smallpox, well then if we bring them into an area where smallpox is an epidemic disease, they've already had it. They are immune to it. They have immunity. So, manufactured goods are going down. The slave trade comes. And ultimately, it ends up where slaves are brought to North America. But understand, as this slave trade is going on, slaves are being taken from Africa all through the Americas. There's a large slave population in Brazil, South America. Many of them end up in the Caribbean at sugar plantations. Then later on, they move from the Caribbean to the 13 colonies in North America. Yes, they are brought on ships and there's an exchange going on. Manufactured goods coming down, slaves being taken from that area of West Africa to the Americas, and the production of raw goods being taken back to Europe. It becomes kind of a vicious cycle for a period of time. There are tribes in Africa, like tribes in Middle America and North America and South America, who are warring against each other. And they are selling their captives to the slave traders. There are multiple ways in which this takes place. And it's a system that becomes part of the story and part of the terrible legacy of what takes place in the early colonies. So there are reasons. The reasons is the labor shortage, because the income in the system doesn't work because they keep dying. Plantation agriculture, they need someone to work in the system that they are putting together. And then this Atlantic commerce and the mercantile system that the British will really, and the Dutch will really bring in, and we'll talk about that in other lectures, begins to just take hold and becomes a vicious cycle. So this is the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. They see it as a necessity because they need labor, and now they have a source to bring labor. But there are differences in the colonies. Spain was about empire. So Ferdinand and Isabella, they want to establish their reign and their rule. And they're after gold. They're after the treasure and the status that comes with having material wealth. This is what was going on primarily with Spain. France is a little different when the French come over. The French primarily go into the area of Canada. Anybody ever been to Canada? Okay. Quebec is a province of Canada. In Quebec, the primary language is French, still to this day. Now, it's starting to get less and less. But I remember going to Toronto as a kid and going to a Burger King for the first time, and it was a croissant, and they spoke French, okay? But Toronto's in Ontario, a little bit different. Quebec, still heavily French. Because this is where the French established their hold, and then on down through the Mississippi and the Mississippi River Valley, and then you have New Orleans established in 1718. You have Mobile and Biloxi established even before that. So New Orleans is, I went there a lot. I still go there. Different town. It's French. And so you have the Spanish influence in Florida and the Southwest. You'll have the English establishment along the coast. This even happens, later on. We finally get a hold of French Middle America, and it's not until Thomas Jefferson that we do so, because of a treaty that he makes with Napoleon, and we ended up with a large swath of land. That's when you have Lewis and Clark exploring the new territory that we got from the French. But we'll have an established connection with the French in multiple times. But when the French come over, they're worried more so about fur trades. So they're going out and killing whatever animal, like a beaver pelt or an elk or a moose or whatever they can get a hold of. And along the way, the main difference between the Spanish and the French is they're making alliances with the natives that seem to endure time. Yeah.
Isn't, okay, I might be wrong, this might be a hoax, but isn't that another reason why Spain really wanted to conquer the Aztecs, is because they had a lot of gold?
A lot of gold. And even when they come through the southeast, when De Soto is coming through the southeast, there is the idea of going to find gold. There's an incident that takes place with a tribal leader in the southwest, and he convinces one of the Spanish leaders, the conquistadores, that there is a city made of pure gold. And it is basically this way. And they end up going into the middle of America to find this city that never exists. And they, on the spot, kill the individual that led them there. But yes, they were after the gold. The French, they intermingle with the natives. They even take native wives. They become kind of integrated, whereas the Spanish are here to conquer. The French seem to come in and they can settle amongst the natives and trade with them and build alliances with them. The Netherlands, they come in and they're very much about commerce. This will be the Dutch. They come in primarily in New York and the establishment there as far as their colonies are concerned, and we'll talk about the colonies in several other lectures. And then the English come in and establish permanent settlements. They try at Roanoke and the colony, but it's not until Jamestown that it's fully established as far as an English existing colony. But the Spanish have colonies that exist. St. Augustine, Florida is the largest or the longest established settlement of a European power in America, in North America. And at St. Augustine, Florida, there were other settlements, but they were destroyed out even before St. Augustine. So the English they're all competing for the resources of North America. They're just doing it in a different way. So what are the competing ideas of liberty? The native people, they see literally like they see freedom, community, kinship, stewardship. The Europeans, they're very much about property, about ownership. The natives don't understand the concept of ownership. They don't have a concept of ownership. That's why when the Dutch buy Manhattan, the natives are just like, you can't buy this. You can't own this. This is not owned by anyone. This is given to us by our Creator. The Great Spirit gave this to us. It can't be owned. The Dutch don't see it that way. And other Europeans don't see it that way. They're about social rank, where native communities do have kind of an established governance in their tribes. Europeans is a little bit different. It's about social rank. It's about birthright. It's about being born into a class of people. It's about the crown and the power of royalty and monarchy. And we are doing this, like Columbus said, for our great king. They're not seeing it this way. And then the Africans even have a different idea of liberty, but yet they're denied freedom. They have a culture of survival, and they, yes, have a resistance to what is going on by the Europeans. So I shared with you kind of some primary resources. I shared with you some from the Journal of Columbus, some from Bartholomew das Casas and his view of the natives. And then understand that there are long established indigenous traditions that are part of their community. Even today, There are traditions that the Native Americans peoples still hold to, and their ways of looking at things. Native American culture is much more assimilated into European culture and the other cultures even today. But there are still, we still have tribal areas that are solely associated or solely belong to particular tribes. And this is where you find those traditions a little more steeped than just your normal culture. So in all of these, what assumptions are present? Well, Columbus is assuming they're all just going to bow down when he comes in. That he's unfurling the seal of the king before them and they're just going to fall and bow. He doesn't think about the fact that they're all going to die because of epidemic disease. What are the motives of Columbus? The motives of Columbus are to come in and to establish a trade relationship to spread the gospel. What's the motive of De las Casas? Well, the motive of De las Casas is, I'm writing back to the king saying that what's going on in the treatment of the natives is not a positive thing. And which account is most reliable? Well, they're all reliable. They all have a perspective, and they all can give us an understanding of what took place there. So kind of review, we had this migration from Asia over during the Ice Age. They came down, they established, there's native diversity, there's regional diversity amongst the natives. They're dealing with different resources, different cultures. Because of that resources, you have these great civilizations that have sprung up before Columbus ever showed up. Then you have in the exploration of the Europeans across North, South, and Middle America, the conquest of the Spanish by different groups who came into different locations with a purpose, some wiping out entire civilizations. Most of what wiped out the civilizations was not the actual fighting itself, it was the epidemic disease that they brought with them. Then the Atlantic slave trade and the system, it becomes a deadly necessity because they need labor, because the encomienda system that they wanted to try at the beginning fails because of epidemic disease and death. And then you have the competing definitions of liberty and all of this. What is freedom? And they look at freedom and liberty in different ways. And that's all I have for you tonight. So we'll do it again next week. I'll put this out on the module 1. There's already a presentation there, but I'll put this on there as well. And y'all just have a good night, okay? Thank you for being here. If you didn't tell me your name before you leave, let me see. I got you, Jillian.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
So that was actually fun.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so my situation, I'll probably be late. Even if I have to miss a class, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah,
When I miss a class, and is there anything I'm gonna miss?
Well, I'll try
Activities and stuff?
to post the lecture. So.
And then if I read, listen to lectures,
Uh-huh.
do the quizzes,
Uh-huh.
study guides and get them front and back, I'm gonna be fine.
You bet. You bet. Yeah.
Hey, Alicia 3.
All right. Alicia, thank you.
It's full Nugent.
Okay. Yeah. Got you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I know there's only an online book. Do you happen to have an extra physical copy?
I only got one.
Darn.
I'll ask for one. I'll see.
'Cause I hate online.
Okay.
I learn better with physical.
Okay.
If not, it's fine. And I guess they email us all the login stuff?
I think so.
Okay.
We'll find out though.
Figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Do you have any more courses that are online?
I'm working, so all my classes
Okay.
are online.
The easiest way to do to go to, like I have him for humanities online.